Okay, in our final lesson in Unit 1, we're going to be looking at economic models. A lot of these models you've seen already, but we're going to kind of look a little more detail as to why we use them. So we begin by talking about the analysis section. Economic models are related to positive statements. So what that means is that positive statements concern what is, was, or will be. So when we look at these types of statements, what we're really talking about is the fact that they can be tested and they can be proved. So any of the models we look at have gone through the process of being tested and proven. In other words, that means that we can trust what the models are telling us and the data that we receive from them. Now, this is different, though, from what we call normative statements, because normative statements are value-added judgments, and they can't be tested, and they don't contain any facts. So economists avoid these types of statements. Because economics is complex, determining cause and effect is not easy. And this is why you simplify the models and isolate variables. So when we talked about the production possibilities curve, we only looked at two possible variables, and that's why we're simplifying it down. And we use this term, other things remaining equal. So basically what we're saying is if we ignore everything else and focus on these two things, that allows us to develop a cause and effect relationship. Okay, economic models are constructed under the premise of the scientific method, which you probably learned in your science classes since you were in elementary class. So starting with asking the question. So all of our economists have asked different questions as to how things were occurring within economies. They did the research, they constructed their hypothesis and said, okay, here's what I think is occurring. And then they spent a ton of time testing it over and over and over again to see if it was actually true. And they analyze these results. And then you end up with one or two possibilities. Either it's true or it's false, and you got to start over. But each one of the economic models that we look at has gone through this process and has been tested to see if it's proven correctly or not. And that's that whole issue with these positive statements. Those positive statements are tested to ensure that they are correct. So probably the most popular and probably one of the easiest to understand economic models is that of the circular flow model, which we just looked at. Remember, it shows the interaction of households and firms in two markets, the market for goods and services and the market for the factors of production. It's in these markets where households and firms are interacting with each other. That's where the transition of factors of production, goods and services, money takes place. And so it's within these two markets that the firms, the households, they will interact with each other. So we have the two households, we have our households, we have our firms, we have our goods market, we have our factors market. So these two will interact within those two markets. You know, obviously when we look at A, it's the supply of the factors of production. And also, in return, they get wages, rents, interest, and profit. On the bottom end of that, of course, in the factor market, firms are purchasing the factors of production. They are employing them from the households through the factor market, and in return, of course, it's wages, rents, interest, and profit. So on the left side, of course, is the movement of goods and of the factors of production for wages and rent. So for example, a household provides labor through the market to the firm, and the firm pays them wages. On the right side, we get down here with D and we look at the goods and services that are being supplied into the market by the firms. And these are the revenues from the sale of goods and services. So this is that total revenue that firms are making. And of course, they're making it because they're selling goods and services to the households. And the households, of course, are spending on goods and services. So that's that circular flow model that we looked at a second ago and how this movement is taking place. And this is an economic model that has been tested through the scientific method. And so when we look at it, we see all that's taking place. Now, of course, we have a third factor involved here, and that's the government. What role is the government going to play? One of the things about the circular flow model, when we talk about the government, is a lot of economic theories have been developed on the basis of exactly what is the government doing within the circular flow model. So we know one thing. Everyone is paying taxes in different forms and amounts to the government. The government then uses that money to develop programs which then transfer the money back to the households and the firms. Now, they don't just necessarily hand over cash, but it's the programs that are designed to help households and the programs that are designed to help firms. That's that transfer. And then, of course, the government's responsible for spending on goods and services. So we see the development of this circular flow model, with an influence being exactly what does the government do within that model. So let's look at some economic thought here. So different economic schools of thought have developed from different interpretations of the circular flow model. In particular, they focus on the influence of the government in the economy. So on one end, we have what we call laissez-faire. Laissez-faire is complete hands-off, meaning the government has zero interaction within the market. On the other end is communism, in which the government controls all aspects of that circular flow model. So what we're looking at is two ends of the spectrum. On the far left, we would have laissez-faire thought, in which government doesn't have any interaction at all. They're not going to do a thing within that market. It's going to flow by itself on the basis of price. On the far right side, on the way other end, is communism, in which the communists say that circular flow model is going to be 100% controlled by the government in order to create complete equality. So laissez-faire and its hands-off policies of not touching the economy creates absolute efficiency. While on the other end, you have this communism which says government's going to control everything.